Okay, well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, wherever you are listening to this from or watching even. This is episode 5 of our exploration of the 40 Rules of Love, based on the novel by Elif Shafak. So today we are going to be talking about rules 9 and 10, which I will pop up on the screen in a moment. But before we get started looking at the actual rules, I would like our small but sweet panel to introduce themselves. So, in no particular order, Cassandra, can I start with you? Just a brief introduction to who you are, what you do, where you live, and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really good to be here. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I'm Cassandra Eve. I have an offering for women mainly called Whole Woman, where I offer coaching and women's retreats and online courses. My work is based in astrology, embodying that bigger picture of who we are. How does that work? Particularly the sacred feminine archetypes. I particularly love Rumi. I was introduced to him about 20 years ago, or to his poetry, and I find it really moves the heart, really opens the heart. Yeah. So good to be part of this.
Okay, good to have you. Thank you for being here. And Christine, one of our returning panelists, please just remind us or remind our audience who you are.
Oh, yes, Christine Miller. I am an advocate for love in the world, for a love that is universal and all encompassing. And I particularly look at love in the workplace, love in organizations, because to me, that is somewhere that urgently needs to have love, compassion, and caring so that we can spread love in the world and in places where sometimes love is considered a four-letter word. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And I work as a consultant and executive coach for leaders. And
Awesome.
it's
Well,
always lovely to be here.
and it's always lovely to have you. I mean, yeah, certainly love's a four-letter word in the workplace, which, shouldn't be mentioned. But I think, the last few days, I think love's been a four-letter word in the world. There's been very little of it about in the last few days. Certainly, in my experience, there's been anything but. But anyway, we're not going to go there. So, I am Elizabeth Carney, your host for today, and I am a master coach, the author of Totally Real, a blueprint to reboot your life. And I currently live in Italy, where I'm renovating this huge house where hopefully people will come for retreats in due course, or just to be. That's the whole point. Just come here and just be and come home to love. It's an inside job after all, and we don't often have enough time to reflect and do that kind of work. So that's where I'm aiming to go, alongside the other courses and programs that I run. And I have always loved the things that I've seen from Rumi too. And this book, when we read it in the Silver Tent Book Club, made a profound impression on me. Hence why we're here discussing these rules, because I suddenly said, why don't we do some Silver Tent TV programs on these? So here we are, and this is episode 5. And we are going to take a look at rules 9 and 10 today. So here we go. Hopefully, you can see that up on the screen now. And I'll read it out and then ask for you to give me your opinions on this. So, rule number 9: east, west, south, or north makes little difference. No matter what your destination, just be sure to make every journey a journey within. because if you travel within, you'll travel the whole wide world and beyond. So I'm going to go to you first, Christine. How do you react to that as a first reaction? I think you need to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I agree that the direction, the location makes very little difference. And I think that, oops, losing my, excuse me, losing my headphones here. I think this idea of the inner exploration being critically important is probably what strikes me most, because it's only by doing that in its inner exploration, wherever it may take us, that we will find ourselves and find the capacity to love, and find the capacity to fulfill our potential and realize in every sense of the word who we truly are. And it is very much it can be a very circuitous journey, and it can also at times be a fairly straight path, and we have the ability to choose, but we don't necessarily have the ability to choose what occurs on that path. What we do have is the ability to choose our response, and rather than react, to respond, to pause, to take account, to accept that this is occurring, and to look for the growth and the benefit of what we're being exposed to. And that in its way does definitely help us to have a broader understanding of the world and beyond, and what our place in it has been, is, and can also be, with potential for the future. So yes, I think the inner journey is something that perhaps in the modern world needs to be brought back into full perspective, because it doesn't always get brought center stage as something which is crucial to all our inner development and our ability to be at one with and in the world. So that's my initial response.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were talking last time or the time before about the busyness of the modern world, and, how difficult it is to just be, to go inside, to do that work, to face ourselves and who we truly are. Um, I think sometimes it gets more and more challenging. But I'm interested to see what your views on rule number 9 are, Cassandra.
Yeah, really interesting. I've been reflecting on it during today because I'm a traveller. I've lived in New Zealand, I've lived in India, I'm born in the UK, I'm back in the UK now. And I love to travel. But my greater love is the travel inward, because without that journey, sometimes it's a journey, sometimes it's instant, to reconnect with what is the deeper aspect of myself. Perhaps that's the way I'd like to describe it today at this moment. There's no fulfillment in the external. Yeah. So my fulfillment comes from the inner and can be mirrored in the external. And my experience through my life is that all those places that I've traveled through, to and through and lived in, have not been a want. They've arrived because of that connection inside. So, I've been connecting deeper inside, going into new places. And then an offering has come to India. Why don't you come to New Zealand and live? So it's been like this mirroring of my deepening within, and has brought me to also some of the most profound experiences in my life. I mean, I lived for 2 years in earthquakes, in active earthquakes in New Zealand. In India, I was taken to spiritual masters and mothers where I had the most amazing awakening. So there is, I feel, when we go deeply in, there also needs to be this willingness to experience the adventure of that in life as well. Yeah, to balance and integrate both the inner and the external. And I firmly believe that we're here as creators. So how are we living that creative potential that we're connecting with inside? If we are, one of the things that you also both affirmed was that need for us to be taking the inner journey much more so nowadays. And I would agree with that as true as well. And I feel that some of the collective experiences we're having are happening for that reason, to actually point us back inside and say, you have a choice here. How are you going to respond to this that's happening in the world? And putting my astrology hat on, looking at those rhythms as well, it is very much also mirroring that we're being moved into a place where we're being called to realize the true power of our own creative potential when we're connected with our divinity. Yeah. So both and for me are important, but the external without the internal lacks juice, actually, really. And that's why so many people are searching, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a traveler too, and while you were talking, it suddenly struck me that the more you know yourself and the more you are able to go within, I think that enables a better understanding of wherever you may find yourself and the
Yeah.
ability to better respond to what you find, to different cultures, to different people. And I have seen on my travels, in Nepal, in I mean all over Europe, in Greece, Nepal, Tanzania, all sorts of places. That's some pretty scary mountains and things like that. And I've seen people who literally are almost blissfully unaware either of themselves or what's going on around them, and they miss so much. And typically here in Italy, I see lots not Italians but visitors typically who are miss everything. They are busy running around from one place to the next, but I think that's what I'm trying to say. And I think it's what a lot of tourists do sometimes. They rush around and they have to get the good picture or the good selfie but they didn't actually experience anything. They didn't stand there and, on top of a mountain or in front of an awesome monument or looking at a river or whatever it might be. They didn't stand there and wonder at it all and feel it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. They didn't feel it. They didn't really experience. And I still believe so many people do this and the world passes them by. Now, does that mean they're not in tune with themselves and love is passing them by? I don't know. What do you think to that, either of you?
I mean, I feel for many people, and I can certainly recognize this in my early days of my journey. There's a fear of going inside. There's a fear of what am I going to face by looking at what's happening inside myself, my unhappiness, or the patterns of life that are, the things in my life that aren't working or whatever. And I often wonder, it's kind of a mystery to me, this awakening point, when people suddenly decide, often through pain actually, which relates to the next rule, interesting enough, often through pain, as was the case in my life in the late 80s. Everything fell apart, and so I started to question, well, I'm the common denominator in all this. What's going on? And I actually felt like my consciousness, rather than looking out, it turned and it started to look within. It was an actual kind of physical sensation. And from that point, the journey really opened. But, you know, in the collective, maybe there is this fear of the shadow, you know, and there's certain, we don't necessarily want to go there this evening, but there are certain figures in our collective culture at the moment that actually are good hooks for that collective shadow. We're seeing it played out on the world stage. So yeah, I can't remember what your question was now. I've kind of gone off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, talking about
fear,
shadows
fear.
and
Yeah,
fear, and if I suppose what I was getting at was if you don't go within and understand yourself, I'm just wondering if not understanding yourself first actually precludes you fully understanding everything that's going on externally and being able to respond to it with love, or with love rather than fear, I guess.
yeah, yeah. We can't, in my experience, I can't make a conscious response, and yes, unless I'm aware of what's happening within myself. I'm just reacting.
Yeah. Okay. Christine, anything to comment on that particular area?
Yes, it seems like all three of us are travelers. Um, I, we've also lived in multiple different countries and continents over the years, and are now actually in France. And I feel that 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 inner journey, um, I think it is in some ways prompted by travel, opening all kinds of eyes, not only our external eyes to the sheer beauty of our world, but also culturally, that when we go to live as guests or migrants, or however we do it, when we go to different countries, even just for relatively short visits, there are those people who will embrace the difference and love the difference. And there are people who are afraid of what that difference might entail, whether it's something as simple as food and drink, or whether it's a much greater experience. For example, I would be very doubtful that you could spend any amount of time in India and not come away with some kind of awakening experience, because in my experience, the continent of India is it's a kind of beautiful chaos that causes you to have to readjust what you think, how you are, who you are being. And I think India is it can be a very harsh mistress if you're living there for any length of time. And even just for relatively short visits, it's effectively a kind of culture shock. And I feel that culture shock is actually very enlightening and does cause us to be able to see what else there might be and what else we can go to and how we can learn. And it is to do with opening ourselves to that inner journey and inner realizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't actually been to India, but I have been in Nepal and I've been in Kathmandu. And whilst you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, Kathmandu is like that. My description of Kathmandu, it's like I said, it's like being inside a kaleidoscope, both in terms of sound and what you can see. There are just so many colors and shapes and so much noise, and it's just there is so much. And then you put your boots on and walk into the mountains. And I did trek to Everest Base Camp, and you move from that hustle and bustle and noise and explosion of everything to the most beautiful, perfect silence in different places. And, the wonder of Mother Nature. And there was various points along that whole journey where indeed it was most profound. And, I don't think anybody does that whole trip and comes back unchanged, some more so than others. But the extremes are so obvious. The noise, the silence, the peace, the lack of peace, and the how it affects your mind, and the I think the realization of how big it all is and how tiny we are in the whole scheme of things. And never more so than there is actually a place you come to uh, on the trek to Everest Base Camp, and it's a memorial place, and they've built lots of cairns and monuments to people who died on the mountain, and it is so quiet, unbelievably quiet. You can't hear a thing. It's like you walk into it and it's like a protected zone. And then you can wander around and read stuff that people have written about different um, climbers and what happened to them. And I'm talking, this is not just recent, it goes over the years. And I couldn't be near anybody. I just had to sit and look at it. And that is where I think the real profound realization of how tiny we are in the scheme of things actually hit me, and how fragile we are as well, and how short our time is. Those were the thoughts that came to me, um, with that introspection. But I do know people who don't ever go in. It's all that everything's experienced externally. And I think that's quite sad, especially in the modern world. And I think this particular rule, is absolutely valid, like we've been talking about with most of the others. But this, it's almost like if you could teach people to do this, like at school, kids at school, they might have a much different experience of life. I think it's as relevant now as it ever was when Shams, if he actually wrote them. How do you feel about that? I think relevance in the modern world, yay or nay? Any observations on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And it
totally.
is coming into schools. I have a friend in the West Midlands who's taking meditation into schools, primary schools. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah,
It's
we
happening in
need more
schools.
of that, eh? I did a
Yeah.
talk once in a primary school, and it was in a school, and it was near an army base where there was a Gurkha regiment, and a lot of the kids there were from Gurkha families, and so they had relatives in Nepal, and it was quite fascinating the discussions that we had. But the most profound thing that I remember was the chimes at the end. I was either, I don't know, I can't remember if it was the singing bowl I used or the chimes. And they're all, we'd finished and everybody was just chattering and coming up to me and asking more questions and looking at memorabilia. And they were all lovely, fascinated. But then I'm like, okay, it was the end of the day. And I chinged the bells or the bowl or whatever it was. And that whole class of kids, they were about nine, everybody, I heard the Oh, and
Mm.
they all went completely silent. And you could see how it took them in, and it was just one little, but it reached them. It reached them all because it was like there was a huge cacophony of noise, and then suddenly it all went silent. And they were all, you could see the awe and wonder on their face of what had happened. And then we were doing like namaste and all the rest of it. It was the end of the day. And I remember saying to the teacher, I think, would you like one of these? This could be quite useful to, and I'd love to see it. I'd love them to make time. And that's the thing, isn't it? Making time is
Yeah.
something that we need to do these days.
We actually are doing it. We actually are making time, but it depends what our focus is.
Mm-hmm.
That just brought me back to memories of my school days, where I was a Catholic family, and so I was educated in church schools. And I remember the prayers. I can remember, especially in the convent school where I went when I was 11, that we said a prayer before every lesson. And for French and Italian, we had to know the Hail Mary in in the appropriate language, which was quite interesting. But I suppose the intention, although at the age of 11, 12, 13, and teenage, we probably weren't closely enough acquainted with what was happening, that this was actually a preface to being going inward and having that bit of time between lessons just to center it. Would I don't know that the teachers saw it as that, but certainly I think if you have that kind of group activity where everybody recites the same words and is together, at least in those few moments of reciting something that has some kind of meaning, it is a great way of settling a whole group of people. Just as you mentioned, Liz, the chime and the ringing of the bells. And we did have bells at the end of the lessons, after all, but that signified the ending and the changeover. So
Yeah.
we
Well, if it
do
was
keep some of these.
anything like our school bells, they weren't particularly peaceful.
No,
No.
definitely not. Jarring rather than peaceful. But yeah, the interesting experience to look at where these traditions come from, and whether they're still maintained.
Well, of course they are in certain cultures, aren't they?
Mm.
Just not, maybe not in the Western cultures so much anymore. I have to ask some of my Italian neighbours if they still do that before lessons here. They do a lot of stuff by rote and repetition here still. It's a very different way of learning, um, which, of course, a lot of the schools are linked to the churches, I think, as well. So you've got all the repetition and rote there. So it's what they're used to. Um, and obviously, I grew up. I went to a Catholic primary school, and so there was always morning assembly, but we didn't have any any prayers before class. I think we might sometimes have them at the end of the day before we went home, but not before every lesson. So it's interesting that whole thought of centering and bringing that moment of peace in. I hadn't actually thought about it in that context before. So, any more thoughts on rule number 9, or should we have a look at number 10?
Let's move on to number 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. If you travel within, you'll travel the whole wide world because you can go anywhere, can't you? We didn't really talk about that bit. You travel the whole world and beyond, and anybody with imagination knows that you can go anywhere you want if you look inside, anywhere you can imagine. So anyway, rule number 10. Yeah, I like this one too. The midwife knows that when there is no pain, the way for the baby cannot be opened and the mother cannot give birth. Likewise, for a new self to be born, hardship is necessary. Just as clay needs to go through intense heat to become strong, love can only be perfected in pain. Wow. And I think a lot of conversations the last few days have been around this birth or rebirth and pain and hardship. And, it's meant to happen and everything will be all right eventually. But, however long ago this was written, clearly it looks like nothing very much has changed, and it's still, like all of them, as relevant as ever. So, Cassandra, I'm going to start with you on this one. What's your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've really been reflecting on this one today. And what I really came to, that kind of the core of it is, when our heart is broken, however that happens, in my experience, that breaking is an opening to a deeper love and a deeper potential of love to be reflected as well in another, in life, however that is. I had a bit of difficulty with the word hardship. And I think it's quite an old-fashioned word, isn't it? Hardship. I would maybe use the word challenge or something like that. And in my experience, particularly when I lived in spiritual community for 20 years, when I was living in community, and it was a fire of transformation, because there's no escape. I live on my own now, so there is a bit more of an escape from, that intensity of reflective relationship. And the one thing that used to surprise me most was when I was really going through it, when the fire was really burning in me in terms of transformation, people would often say to me, "Wow, you look so beautiful today, Cassandra." And I'd be like, "Well, I feel like shit, actually." But it's the surrender. It's the surrender to the pain that opens that love. And that was such a profound, I mean, it was a hard learning, but it was also really profound learning to face and be with whatever was endeavoring to open within me, which was kind of like, when you think about birth, it was kind of like a shell, that was being shattered inside me. This shell of belief in whatever about myself was being shattered so that I could experience and embrace more of the truth of who I am. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I don't agree with that you can't experience love without pain, but my experience is that pain, when we love, especially, pain is a doorway to deeper love. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask that because my question was, you know, do we have to go through pain, like with one love affair ending and being rejected, and go through all that pain and trauma in order to awaken to a greater love or a greater understanding of ourselves, and moving closer to true love? And I was wondering that, and then I thought of some people that I know, several couples who met when they were like 16 or something, and met, fell in love, got married, stayed together, and basically had beautiful relationships. Okay, you don't know what went on behind closed doors, but when you see two people who look like, they're still gazing into each other's eyes and holding hands after a lifetime together, you think, well, do some people just get the get out of jail free card, the pass straight to true love, whereas the rest of us have obviously been on the naughty step and have to go through pain. I don't know the answers to that, but maybe you can enlighten us, Christine.
Oh gosh. Okay, so I'll start out from a very personal perspective on love and close relationship. And my husband and I have been together now for 48 years. And it hasn't always been easy. It's always been a very close togetherness, and it is probably a path of hard inner journey and learning as to who you become through relationship. And I've done a fair amount of relationship counselling in my time, and the question always was, is it worth saving? Is it worth persisting? And evidently in our case, the answer has always been yes, that there is something there which is very special. And I think the kind of pain that emerges from this kind of long evolving relationship is probably to do with the previous rule of the inner journey, and who are you prepared to be and become in order that the relationship retains its integrity. And as long as that answer is yes, I will tread through that fire of transformation. And the answer is that from both parties, both people, and you can see the greater love and the universality, and how you can become a much bigger, more expansive person with a very open heart by doing the work, contracting the heart muscle and opening the heart. Which brings us to the sort of the rhythms and contractions of birth. Like when I had my first child, we rushed to the hospital. We were in Denmark, living in Denmark at the time. And the midwife said to me, they're going to have to get an awful lot harder, and you're going to feel an awful lot more before we get to the point that you're going to deliver this baby. In fact, I was only there for 40 minutes before my daughter emerged, which had its disadvantages of being a rapid opening. But I can see what the metaphor behind this discussion, and this representation of the midwives knowing what has to happen for that, for the opening of that passage, for the magnitude of whatever needs to come into the world, whatever kind of birthing we might be doing, we have to open the passage. Whatever the muscle is, whether it's a mental, a spiritual, a physical muscle, has to open. It has to open sufficiently to allow what it is that we want and need and desperately love to give birth to be able to emerge. So those are my thoughts on this. I actually kind of reacted to this, you've got to go through hardship to get love, to be loved. I think there are probably hardships attached to being able to continue to give love when it's perhaps not being reciprocated, and the hardships of knowing when you've reached a situation where where the love is not growing and the relationship is not growing and not going in the direction that both of you might prefer, and probably more painful if it's only one of you who doesn't see the future, who doesn't want to go through through those fires of transformation in order that a relationship can succeed. So I don't necessarily think it's entirely about sacrifice, because that would have a kind of slightly negative overtone for me if it was too sacrificial. But I think we all are evolving, and this is where we are in the universal condition of our world, that there are minds and hearts that haven't yet been exposed to the flint and the spark of opening in order to understand the greatness and the universality and the power of love to transform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's a profound topic, isn't it? And you talk from a completely different position to and different experiences to me. We all have different experiences, but mine is more of absolute heartbreak, where the husband, he decided he wanted out. There wasn't any discussion. I wasn't even given the respect of being allowed to have a discussion, to even fight for it. There was, I'm gone. And that was, the end of that. And so, that was heartbreak. But then the next one I fell in love with, it's like he put me back together and then break me into millions of pieces. So I get the pain. I get the pain. I get the pain, the highs, the lows, and the opening up of it. And I'm, thankful to have experienced some of the profound heights of those great loves. And, those are the two main ones. But then I think, oh, when I hear you say 48 years, I'm thinking, how wonderful is that? Where the two of you have got this balance. And yeah, you've said it's not always been perfect, fine. But the two of you have got this understanding and both feel that it's worth fighting for, and so you can move on, through whatever pain it is. But it, we all experience, I don't know, different levels of pain, different situations. And I'm still here at, the ripe old age of 64 thinking, will somebody else come into my life? Have I done enough, if you like, enough inner work? Do I know myself enough to bring something else forward, back to a new relationship, just like, mother of the silver tent Franny has just done. It's, I think, whatever, going back to the previous rule, wherever you travel, whatever your experience is as well, that will create a different response and a different perspective on all of these areas. And is it about knowing ourselves? Is it about going through the pain? Do we have to, as you say? And why do some of us have more pain than others? Why do some people go in and have an easy labour and others are there for days? Mine was somewhere in the middle. But there's so many things that when you actually look at each of these rules in a bit more detail, up pops like sparklers or something, lots of other things. You could go off at all manner of different tangents. So, Cassandra, your view on pain, the depths of pain, how much you have to go through, does that make sense that we have to go through significant pain to truly come to love? Or...
What I'm seeing as you were both speaking is that we are all beautiful facets of the jewel of humanity, and we all have very different experiences. We have different soul journeys. We have different within that one jewel, if you like. We have different ancestry. We're playing out so much within our own individual existence, and yeah, I've sometimes looked at my life has been intense in many, many different ways, both in terms of, and that is the word I would use for pain actually, is intensity rather than pain, because I think the minute that word is there's a kind of contracted belief about that. Whereas for me, with intensity is something I can open to in a way rather than pain. And I need to look at that more, because I think there's so much around, yeah, I'm just saying physical pain is, for me, pain can be physical, whereas the kind of mental, emotional stuff that we go through in terms of our relationships or our beliefs about ourselves that are then shattered or whatever, that for me is more an intensity of a transformation, whereas I equate pain more with the physical stuff. So I feel the journey, whether we're experiencing the love or we're experiencing the pain, is to choose love and to keep choosing love. So the word that kept coming in as well when you were both speaking was devotion. And for me, that's been a strong part of my life. Sometimes it's been external in terms of a spiritual teacher or master that I've been in practice with. Sometimes it's been internal. Sometimes it's been both, So I feel that whatever the experience, we have the capacity of choice. It is said that this is the only planet of choice. So whatever we're experiencing, for me, the question is, can I choose love here? Do I choose to choose love here? Whether it's pain, whether it's intensity, whether it's a beautiful reflection or not. Because some of us also can't receive love. To receive love is painful. So, we're kind of unraveling so many different threads in this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have actually experienced intensity, just as you were saying, but almost like as a physical, the intensity of emotion that is, it actually becomes physical.
Mm.
And, you think of all these, Jane Austen and, novels where, people die of a broken heart. And until that actually happened to me, I thought that was just, fantasy. But
Yeah.
I could, with that intensity, and intensity can be at a high or a low. It's a frequency of emotion, isn't it? And that, sometimes in the moment we are incapable of choosing, I feel, because the intensity is so great, whether it's high or low. But
Yes. Yeah, I do agree with that. But I've experienced where my consciousness I've been in such an intense place that my consciousness has the only way I can describe it is like using my fingers. There's been this little tweak, and then the intensity has become ecstasy. Now that's the mystery, isn't it?
yeah,
You can't go there with your mind. You can't know how to do that. It's not possible as a human being. You can't kind of create a formula to do that. But I've experienced that where the pain, the emotional cutting has been so intense, and then my consciousness just moving slightly, and suddenly it was ecstasy. And women speak about this in childbirth. I mean, that was not my experience, but some women also speak about that switch that happens where the pain becomes ecstatic because you're so surrendered to it, presumably. Yeah.
hey, well, you have no choice but to surrender, do you?
Exactly.
At that
Yeah.
at that point, and that baby's coming, and you read stories of people who struggled so much that that fought, and we're not ready to be a mother, or didn't believe that they were having it, and they have I mean, seen films and read things where people had those experiences and really traumatic, difficult births. Maybe they weren't surrendering, maybe they were fighting it all along. But I totally get that moment where you the choice is taken away from you, and you have to give into it, really. Like, this
Mm.
baby's coming, like it or not, and you do have that moment, don't you, where it's like, um you are kind of almost outside of yourself as well as inside of yourself at the same time. You are just there, allowing it to happen. Well, that's
Yeah.
one way of describing what happened to me. It's just like, it is,
Yeah.
without for somebody who quite often likes to be in control of self and other things. That moment is, you can't be, and the acceptance of that opens you up to a whole new way of being, almost. And then, of course,
Yeah.
when the baby's there and the baby's fine, then you go to another level of ecstasy.
That's the
You
birth of
smile.
the mother, isn't it? That surrender
Yeah.
is the birth of mother, because the woman that was no longer is after the birth.
I think
That
that
is.
first moment of holding your baby and gazing at them, that mutual gazing, that if one is lucky enough to have had that kind of a birth where the baby's put in your arms and you have that moment of connection where you look into the baby's eyes and they look back at you, and there is that is like a real force of nature. It's a real ecstatic bliss of, no matter what the force has been in order to deliver that child, what you have in your arms is that is it's one of the most precious moments, I think, that a human being could ever have. Absolutely. And um, and maybe that's sort of another reflection of how coming through a very forceful, intense experience enables us to look at whatever it is that has happened, is happening, and will happen with fresh eyes that are drenched with love and caring. So we can take that experience and make it part of our growth and development, and the opening of our heart and our soul, and consolation for our spirit.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. I mean, just reflecting back to that very moment, and it's so, so, so true. I totally agree with everything you're saying. And we're talking about this now as mothers, potentially as grandmothers, and it doesn't matter how you talk about it. Nobody that hasn't experienced it could possibly understand. That is,
Mm.
they think they understand. However, until you've experienced it, you really have no clue at the for one, at the intensity of it. Now, that seems to be the word of the day: intensity. And that is, yeah. I don't think. Well, I certainly had no clue that's how it would pan out, when that small baby is, as you say, he's here and he's looking at me. And obviously recently, that small child has just become a dad, has had a baby of his own. And the photos that come, and the way they are, there's pictures of the baby and its mother, and of the baby and my son, and they are just staring into each other's eyes.
Mm.
He had,
Yeah.
she had a slight issue after the delivery, and they had to go surgically deliver the placenta because it wasn't moving. And so my son held him, and the pictures from that moment literally had him just to chest, skin to skin. And they
Mm.
literally stared at each other for an entire hour. And he was struggling with watching his partner go through what she was going through. I know that because I was getting the regular updates of what was going on. But what he then experienced because of, what happened in that immediate, she had held him, she had the bonding and everything. But then as a new dad, to have that, he had a whole hour of skin on skin with this new baby. And so I think they created immediately an intense bond that a lot of the dads, even now, don't get that opportunity at that point, which is also very, very special. Um, so anyway, that's just what's been going on recently. And whatever they tell you about becoming a mother and that moment, then becoming a grandmother. I don't know if you've got grandchildren, but that has happened all over again on another dimension.
Mm. It's
It's so
interesting, as you were
precious.
speaking, I was relating that word that seems to become the word of the recording, the intensity. I suddenly was aware of India again. And it's that about India. It's the intensity, it's every aspect of life. And when I was first there, I couldn't kind of get what it was because it was so intense. In the first 2 weeks, I just wept and wept every day. I was so moved, in lots of different ways. And I realized after a while that it was because every facet of life was there in front of me. And that is an intense experience to experience every facet of life there in front of you. But there was so much joy. That was the gold in it for me, was that I kind of came to this, this understanding of the mystery. It's like, why do I love this so much? It's noisy, it's dirty, it's smelly, there are awful sights everywhere. But then there is so much joy. So
Yeah.
that is when we're willing to face that intensity, that is the possibility, isn't it? It's the joy.
Absolutely. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I saw that same thing in Nepal, and we're there looking at people who seem they have nothing. They have absolutely nothing, but they would give you
Yeah.
what little bit that they do have, and they are always beautiful and beaming and happy to see you, and they live lives of joy which we can't comprehend. Yet you see it in every beaming person that you meet on that trail. They have so much joy in their lives. Even the guy sitting with his few peppers or his spices or something, and he's desperately trying to sell the stuff that he's brought it into Kathmandu, and he's desperately trying to sell it. He's spread his wares out on a map, and he's dressed in on a mat, and he's dressed in rags. But you look at their faces and they're beaming, and you look in their eyes, and they have so much joy radiating out of them that somehow we find really difficult to comprehend.
Mm,
But it's there, it's true, you know,
mm, mm.
and
Yeah.
you see it. And
It's
I guess
life
you've
in
all
the raw.
seen,
Yeah.
It's a definite life force, a
yeah,
real force of nature. And there is I wrote quite extensively about my first experiences in India. Describing India as an artist of exquisite ability, with a paintbrush loaded with every imaginable color, which
yeah,
spatters the canvas and spatters you and infuses you with this energy and this vibrancy. And it is an intensity, and it's that sheer force of so many aspects of life that kind of confront you. And I felt that India knew exactly how to find the points of entry that needed to be opened, where there needed to be a strengthening and an encouragement and revelations and growth. It was really huge, profound experience and totally life-changing experience.
Yeah, it's I know I had similar in Nepal, but India's still on my list. I've not made it there yet, but it's like places like this are almost like they are the heart of humanity, of what is real, because everything else in so many ways is stripped away, and you're looking at raw life, aren't you?
Mm.
And raw life is, where love really resides, without any trappings and fancy stuff. It's getting back to what's absolutely real. Anyway, I've
Absolutely.
just realized what the time is. We have, you know, flown through this hour. So before, we should probably wrap up. Before I do either of you have any final words on tonight's discussion, or either of those two rules that we have been contemplating?
No, I think we've extracted some of the juice from them.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been beautiful.
Okay, and thank you both very much. So those of you who are watching in replay, please do drop us a note, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope it stimulates some thoughts and conversations in you. And watch out for the next episode coming soon. Thank you.